Okay, so this meeting's being recorded. Everybody should have a link to the agenda. If you got any questions, let me know. First of all, any comments on the meeting's minutes from our last meeting? That was 23rd of February. They're in a pull request up on the community page for GitHub. Okay, if we have no comments, we'll go ahead and approve those, move those in. One thing just to think about, we'll come back to this, I think, before the end of the meeting, is whether or not we should move to monthly. It seems like there's just not a lot going on right now. Yeah, just wondering if we're ready to shift back to monthly meetings as opposed to bi-weekly, or if we should stay here. But with that said, I'm going to shift it over to Ruffin right now. There was an issue that you posted about the Turtlebot 3 demo, if you want to go into that a little bit more.
Sure. So before I filed the error on the security regression and the default RMW, I was revisiting updating the security working group demo for the Turtlebot, just to have the entire stack running with the navigation, SLAM toolbox, gazebo, all that jazz, and having something a little more substantial running with the ROS security. And the navigation binaries and Turtlebot binaries all got released finally into Foxy. So I decided to kind of revisit the update, my PR that I had, and I noticed that, oops, I can't run security on anything because the release binaries were not built with the security option. So after filing that and then getting that resolved, I went back and repeated the demo, but I relaxed the security permissions just to get a base level that I can at least have DDS with the cryptography plugin working, and that was not working. So before we've had some issues with the size of the permission policies exceeding the payload for the handshake, but that was sidelined because I had commented out the entirety of the enclave except for the permissive rule for the asterisk or star permission, just glob everything. And that wasn't working on Cyclone or Fast RTPS. And I knew that RMW Connect's CPP had some scalability issues. It wasn't that RMW wasn't working even without security. But RTI released their version 6, and then they've been trying to get their RMW Connect's DDS implementation out. And so I went and modified the environment to build and use that RMW instead. And it is working with and without security for that RMW. So with access control disabled, which was a reasonable baseline. And then when I was able to add access control, I was able to get a list of the insufficient permissions, which allows us to triage the minimal spanning policy. So that's where I am right now. So in the sense that it's kind of a regression, and that the default RMW is no longer working with access control, even if the default RMW is not even working without access control. Sorry. So that's a bit weird. We were sort of in a better place with dashing, so I'm not sure what it may have changed. So that's why I asked that maybe I could use some more help and eyes with if you spot anything or tried out the demo.
So it's not even just so with RTI, if you disable all the ACLs, you can get it running.
With its encryption is working with RMW Connect's DDS. The latest, we've had that SROS PR for removing RMW Connect's CPP or deprecating that. That didn't work with the demo, with or without encryption, but at least the new RMW from Connects does. And that's why I've been using to triage the access control to get the minimum spanning policy. But it's weird that like the default RMW is not working with encryption and access control disabled. Like that was something we had before with like dashing, I think.
So you're unable to get anything working in Foxy then, essentially?
With the release binaries, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's working without security. That's
Yeah.
fine, but
Yeah.
that's not the issue here. I can show you guys if you wanted to, but the demo and the README is sort of self-explanatory if you need to launch it yourself.
Yeah. Okay. And that's all. So do we have you reached out to any of the middleware vendors about that, or?
I haven't. I was going to make a similar ticket like I did with connects to the Fast DDS RMW repo. I don't know which repo I suppose is the best one. Maybe just the RMW Fast DDS CPP. Maybe that's the best repo to do that. But I was going to make the sort of the same template of like this minimal reproducible example and.
I think that's probably. It sounds like a good place to start.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, and is that? Do you think that's a fallout from just the tests not really working or not identifying? Because we should have identified that long before, right?
The toy example demos all work.
Okay.
With security and access control, it's the getting up to scale. So there's something about if you run a real world ROS stack, like a robot with hundreds of nodes and 1,000 topics or something. That's where something bugs down and it's no longer working. Okay. So maybe we could investigate how we could get this, use something like the navigation's CI stack, where they run the entire Turtlebot kind of simulation world gazebo with mapping and navigation, and augment that to where like it's using DDS security and not using DDS security or using access control. That might be kind of cool as like a canary in the coal mine to tell us like when something's going down.
Yeah. All right. I'll see if I can reach out to reach out to Cyclin. See if we can get anything there going there as well. Maybe get some support there. I guess that pretty much covers the Foxy regression as well. I don't know if we had anything else to add on that. I
would have liked to hear from Kyle or Mikhail. What their thoughts
I haven't seen Mikhail lately. No, I know he changed jobs not too long ago, and unfortunately, Kyle's last day with Canonical is actually this Friday as well. So he is gonna. We were talking about the SROS2 repo. He's actually going to stay on as a maintainer of that. He probably won't be in the working group meetings, and you won't see him a lot, but you'll be able to ping him, in GitHub or on ROS Discourse. He'll still be around. So, But yeah, that was unfortunate. So life goes on though. And I'll see if I can get some time to mention him and see if he has any thoughts on this as well. So, but yeah, as far as the Foxy regression, I appreciate you finding that. And, that actually got fixed up without taking too long. I don't know if there's any other lessons learned. I think that the comment about improving the testing, I think, goes along with preventing something like this from happening again.
If we can figure out a way to set up unit tests to test for this sort of a thing, the only problem that I can foresee on occasion is that sometimes a regression will occur that you just didn't expect and didn't think to test for, because you're like, that could never possibly happen. But at the same time, I think that worrying about that particular instance coming up and being paralyzed to not implement better tests is also not the way forward. There are just some things you'll never be able to plan for, and having a contingency in place for those is probably the best thing to do.
Yeah.
But yes, testing to make sure that we minimize this sort of thing in the future is probably good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, all we got to do is find someone with cycles to actually start working on some of this, but at least we can get it on the roadmap. I want to share with you, just moving on to the last topic, some work I was doing with Move It use case. If you remember, we had them demo. They showed us the arm and so on. So I've been working with that a bit. It's actually really easy to use Move It. They have a LXD container, so you can just pull down the LXD container and launch it, and you're good to go. So I was able to real quickly set that up to create 2 different containers. And one container is the one that I call the robot, which you can imagine that one actually controlling a robot. So you launch that and everything kind of runs there. And that's the one that's intended to be self-contained. And then launch a second container where you just have RViz up and running and you can see the robot movement. It subscribes to the joint states and all that. And so they're all in their own ecosystem. So it creates a nice thing for us where we wanted to set it up so that you have the robot running inside its own container, and then the monitor is able to watch the robot through RViz, but not actually control the robot. So pretty straightforward, I think, permissions use case. So I was able to get that up and running using their container, which that's actually running Foxy. And I did not have any problems with the default security. I actually didn't do too much special other than set the environment variable flags. And I say I got it running. I know everything's working. They're talking back and forth. They're all on the same flat network, same actually host machine, just connected through the LXD networking instance. So, but as far as I can tell, I definitely see encrypted traffic going back and forth. I haven't dug deeply to make sure as far as I can tell, security is enabled in there.
And this is with access control, or just the did you use the generate permission?
I used the generate permissions template. Yeah. So I didn't implement any of the access controls yet. I just used the generic allow everything and encrypt everything except for I think the broadcast traffic's not encrypted, but yeah.
I was just curious on maybe how much ephemeral topics are instantiated during the spin up.
Yeah, it looked like there was only there's one subset of them. Let me take a quick look here. I think I had a note on that. Yeah, so they have some transform topics that are dynamically created. I got 4 of them. They all have the same preface, so I think I can just wildcard them. Are there transform nodes, not topics? Sorry about that. I didn't see a lot, actually. It looks all pretty predictable. And I actually have a callback to Henning to say, hey, what is the things that you want to lock down and prevent for the read-only view? How do you want to shape that? So I don't have an answer back. But what I did on this is actually, even though I created some template policy files, I used an off-board certificate authority to create this with the idea of documenting how to have the key materials, particularly the CA, the root CA key materials, separate from the robot itself, and how to create, have a CA and then, be able to distribute artifacts to different hosts or different places throughout the whole ecosystem, if you will. And that actually went pretty well. So I have a document about how to create a ROS CA and distribute the certificates back out. It's kind of like one step ahead of the next step beyond the toy use case, the hello world use case. So I wanted to run a few questions by you while we have. I actually have some notes here. Let me dig them up, because these are very scratch notes, so understand that they will disappear at some point in time. Give me just a second here. Okay, so that's, again, these are just my scratch notes that eventually I want to turn these into a tutorial. And this goes so far as to actually create the and sign a permissions file. So some questions I have for you. I don't know how many of these we'll get through. But first of all, the idea of having an off-board certificate authority, particularly one that's done using OpenSSL, do you feel that's a good use case for a ROS tutorial?
Yeah, the kind of the explanation of what you want to separate, what's private, what's development time versus runtime deployment. That's I think it's kind of obvious, but it's probably good to spell it out to someone who is maybe a little more novice on PKI. What I would like to do eventually, though, is here you mentioned on the agenda is dealing with external CAs or multiple CAs. And, particularly with X509 certificates, you can have like cross signatures, the certificate can be signed by multiple CAs or a chain of CAs. And then how you would use that with ROS particularly, and making sure that whatever certificate authority PIM file that you're pointing SROS to includes the entire, includes the list of CAs that you're willing to trust, because you can have multiple CAs in one PIM file.
Yeah, so I was actually, thinking about that. I want to get the simple use case out, which is just simply creating your own creating a certificate structure that's not on the robot, right? An offline or external something, and then you move the security artifacts onto the robot. And then I think after I get this down, then we can go to both certificate revocation lists. I know Marco is very interested in that, as well as certificate hierarchies and so on. So I see this as just a kind of a springboard to start with this. And again, of course, this is not going to be the final document. The final document is going to turn into pull requests and stuff like that. I just want to make sure this is heading down the right path. So it sounds like this is a start. We've got a lot of other stuff we want to cover with this. One thing too, in this document, even though this is just the beginning, I tweaked a lot of settings. I usually don't like to tweak settings in your hello world example, but in here, particularly with certificate authority, I did, because I really tried hard to shrink the certificates as much as possible. By default, if you don't change the options, you'll get RSA certificates, which are 2 to 3 times as large as the elliptic curve certificates. You get comments in them, and all that stuff ends up on the wire, which I don't think we want any of that. It's nice for a real certificate authority, but I don't think we want it on the robot ecosystem. So do you agree that like our whole goal here should be to keep this really tight?
Yeah, I think the default in SROS is to use elliptic curves.
Yeah, I actually mirrored the default on there, just doing this by hand outside of the existing tool set. So, and there was a part of the problem, just a side note, interesting part of the problem is because the API change never landed. So I would have to go deep into the Python codes in order to like rip out the a Python script for signing a permission authority and so on. And we'll get there. I just didn't want to do that yet. So, but yeah, I actually mirror what is generated through the existing Python SROS API. So, I also, do you agree that like our initial use case doesn't do anything with CRLs? I think we can backfill the CRL use case later on. I think there's probably some things in this certificate authority configuration we might have to tweak to do that. Then you're going to have to set up a CRL site and all that way to distribute them. But if you're okay with that, I want to table that for now.
That sounds good.
Okay. So let's take if you happen to have the document open, just a quick run through or a quick comment on some of the root CA policies. The way that I set this up is I actually took the default that certificates for this would be your enclave certificates default to a 1-year life. Is that long enough? Is it good enough just to say document that, hey, if you want to extend it out? Honestly, I don't know what the examples do.
I think the convention, like if you're releasing, if you're signing it, you might just have a 90 days. So like an end node would only have but for a certificate authority, it's kind of conditional on what the use case of the user wants. Years probably fine for a demo. Yeah. Yeah.
So that way you would have to rekey your robot every year, which is kind of interesting. That may be a licensing thing. Who knows? I don't know. All right. So I'll just note that with the documentation for now. That that can be changed. And also the root certificate by default expires after 10 years, which I think is fitting because that's similar to the typical software life cycle. So, yeah, in keeping with the size trying to keep the size down. I ripped out all of the attributes except for the common name. So there's no comments, no PKI extensions, none of that stuff. The only thing that's required is the common name, which should be the enclave name, right?
Yeah, but sometimes those extensions are useful, like if you want to limit how recursive the CA can do. So if you have a chain of CAs, you can have the parent CA state that I'm only going to assign the sub CA for level 2, and then the next one can only do it for level 1. So some of those are still useful, but they're probably not immediately applicable to.
Yeah, I think there was one that I left in there that said this certificate is useful for like the certificate purpose, so that the root CA has the root CA purpose, and then the any other things that are signed by the root CA by default get the identity and encryption permissions on them. So I'll stick with that, and then you know, when the documents come through, yeah, if there's a tweak on that, we can do that. Do you think it's necessary? So this, in this case, you know, I recommend using a standalone CA that's its own container. I was debating on whether or not to remove all the other certificate authorities from that container. Honestly, I don't even know what the best practice is. It just seems like there's no reason that container should trust anyone else. I don't know if you have any opinions on that.
So are you using a container to generate the artifacts, and you're wondering whether
And it's, yeah, so we create a container, and the container has the has, you know, all the, no, it's the CA bundle. I forget exactly what the package is, but that trusts, you know, all the VeriSign and trust and, you know, DigiCert and whatever else. All those root CAs are in the trusted CA store. And so when you create your CA, then that CA goes in there as well. And I was actually just debating about removing all of those so that the container actually trusts no external certificate authorities.
oh, I'm not sure what to say.
Okay.
On the deal of certificate extensions, I'm going to paste a link. This is way back with SROS1 for a config, and I had comments on all the fields I'd set and then why I'd set them. So I'll paste that in the chat here.
Okay, cool.
And so this was the case where he's using a YAML syntax to set the fields. And YAML is also kind of nice in that you could use the references and anchors to keep the configuration document dry. But you'd have all the fields, like whether this certificate was for key cert signatures, whether it was valid for TLS transport, whether the certificate field was critical. And this was the case where the certificate policies were where the extensions were being used to house the access control as well. So this is in SROS1, the credentials and the identification, or the permissions and the identification credentials were sort of one and the same document,
yeah,
encoded in the PIM certificate. But
mm-hmm.
In SROS2, they're only linked by the common name.
Okay. Cool. All right, so I'll reference that as we go along. That's great. Thanks. I mentioned I used an elliptic curve for everything. So the one last thing, question for you, is that It's easy to use the same root certificate authority for both identity and permission CA. If we don't do that, then we have to actually, do this twice, create two separate CAs, or build out actually a hierarchy where you have a root CA and then two subordinates, one for identity, one for permissions. You think for our initial use case that it's sufficient to use and document and explain that we're going to use the same certificate authority for both identity and permissioning?
Yeah, I think the use case where you'd have two different certificates for identity and permission is pretty rare, even in the DTS field. But they thought it was warranted enough to include it in the spec. The only thing that I think the SROS 2 is doing is it's just making a symlink for the permissions and identity certificate to point to the same root CA file on disk. So, yeah.
Okay. Great. All right, so that's all I had on that. Does anybody have any questions on that? It's just been pretty much me and Ruffin going back and forth. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts.
I like seeing this kind of thing come together, but just don't have anything useful to contribute just yet.
Okay. Yeah, and I think with Kyle's departure, I honestly don't know how much time I'll be able to get back into it, but as I can, I'll try to turn this into at least a work in progress pull request, probably against if you guys all agree, against the actual ROS tutorials. And then we can continue growing it out from there. Particularly get your feedback on anything that should be updated, changed.
I'm a little curious how well this sort of maps to the decentralized identity foundation work. If at all.
So I'm drawing a blank there. Anybody else?
The what framework?
Distributed Identity Foundation with, so they're doing basically distributed IDs with verified credentials, and it's like it's an alternative model, a successor model to the CA VC approach. It builds on it, I guess. I thought I'd share that, see if anybody wanted to think about it for an evolutionary
that's pretty
goal.
Interesting. So one of the things that if we ever wanted to get deeper into it is the security plugins in DDS are all plugins, so the vendors have the respective API for changing and how you want to interpret the documents that are shared, or what method you go about authenticating participants on the network. So having something that's even alternative to traditional X509 certificates, that might be kind of interesting. Maybe it would be an alternative to your conventional, monolithic certificate revocation list, or having a monolithic centralized certificate authority. That'd be kind of cool.
I also think it starts to put you towards the idea of eventually having the components within ROS be able to authenticate each other and say, yes, I trust the subsystem to give me information. I trust the information from the subsystem, or I trust the orders from that subsystem. And as the robots become increasingly complex in their architecture, distrusting the other components in the system starts to make some sense, considering they might be made by different parties or have different roles and responsibilities, and you want to limit, who does what within your robot.
It's actually Marco's big use case. That's, I know, one thing that he's really interested in because he's doing a lot with fleets. And one of their use cases is, what do we do when we lose control of one of our robots in the fleet? So, yeah, that is interesting.
I was talking to somebody about commercial medical robots, and one of their concerns is that you have somebody who can walk into a room and physically alter one of the components in a surgical robot. And unless you've got some ways to verify that the systems are trustworthy, that they're running the right software and all that kind of stuff, you don't want to let them be used in the next medical procedure. And so there's sort of a need for something along those lines. And it's like exciting to see I like the write-up and the direction of it. So it's this. I thought this might be if you're interested in continuing down this path, that's like there's a way to do it, and there's a community around it.
Great.
Phil, I don't know if we had a breakout session, I think a few months ago with the ROS working group on on designing tamper evident hardware and firmware for robotic systems. Particularly, there's some researchers from India presenting their work on how to secure drones and how to verify the restrictions in airspace control for these platforms. So you may want to go check out that particular Q&A session we had.
Very cool.
I'll paste it in the chat.
Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything else to add? Any comments, either or any new business or anything like that? So going back to what I opened up with, any comments or thoughts about whether or not we should move to monthly, or do you want me to throw that out in chat and decide at our next meeting?
I think it's okay. It's like business is slow.
Yeah.
My initial thought was monthly sounded like a good idea, but now here we are 10 minutes over.
Yeah.
Should we do 45 minutes monthly?
I could do that.
Considering that there's not really enough here for weekly, but well, there is enough here weekly, but we do tend to go over on time quite often. So just putting the 45 minutes and then aim just as sort of a safety case, and then aim for 30 if we can.
Yep. All right. So are you guys all in favor of moving to once a month, 45 minutes meeting? Any complaints about that? So I'll go ahead and propose that then. Update the meeting invite and throw that out on discourse. So the only thing I'm wondering is about time zones and alternating them, but I'll figure that out. Probably still alternate them early and late. So okay. All right. Yeah, great discussions. Just a reminder, we still have the SROS2 quality items. I just keep them attached to our meeting minutes every week. I don't think we got any new action items from this week. So with that, if nobody else has anything else, we'll call it a day. All right. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.